Hello, welcome to the Brave Writer Podcast. I'm Melissa Wiley, Julie Bogart's co-host. Julie is attending to some family matters, and I thought today I would record a short episode about a subject that is very near to my heart, a subject that I unfortunately have a whole lot of experience in. But that means I've learned a lot, and so I have some things that I think could be useful to share. And that is ways to support a friend who has a loved one in the hospital. There's lots of things that we think about doing when we have a friend who is the patient, but I want to focus today specifically on ways that you can really help out somebody who is serving as caregiver to maybe a child or a parent or, another family member who is spending a lot of time in the hospital. And so basically, this is about ways to care for the hospital caregiver, because it can be exhausting and dispiriting sometimes. And there's lots of little things and some big things that we can do to help somebody out who is in that situation, to make sure that our friend doesn't get burned out, run down, fatigued, overwhelmed, neglect their own health because they're pouring everything they have into taking care of someone that they care about. And I know this is a little off our usual topics, but I think it's relevant to all parents. And I'm going to say some things that are specific to homeschoolers, but really this applies to any of us who have a friend who is going through some stuff. Okay. Why do I know so much about this? Why do I have such a long list of suggestions? Well, I have spent a lot of time in the hospital with two of my children. My firstborn daughter, my oldest child, was not quite 21 months old when she was diagnosed with leukemia. This was a long time ago. She is a happy and healthy young woman now. So this story, I'm very grateful to say, turned out it has I can't say a happy ending because her story's not over, which is the happy part, right? But back then, gosh, it was a rough time. And I've talked about it a little bit here on the podcast. If you don't know that story, the short version is that my husband and I were both in our 20s. I think we were about 27 years old. Kate was our only baby at the time, and she was diagnosed with leukemia, and it was very advanced. She had to be immediately admitted to the pediatric intensive care ward, where she spent several days. They actually did 2 total blood exchanges because the cancer was so advanced that her blood was basically nothing but cancer. And then she spent the next 9 months mostly inpatient in the pediatric oncology ward. And she wasn't, when she started, she wasn't even 2 years old yet. She was still nursing. So I stayed with her full time in the hospital. We got home a couple of times during that period, but never for very long. We did have one 10-day stint at home during that time. But then she spiked a fever and we had to go right back in. For the most part, she was just there. She was on high dose inpatient treatment, and then there were fevers and infections that just kept her in the hospital. And after that period, she moved to outpatient treatment, low dose chemo for another 2 years. And during that part of her treatment, I think we only had 1 2-week long hospital stay. But those 9 months, oh my goodness, that was pretty intense. Now, I learned a lot, and it was good that I learned some things, because fast forward 15 years later, and my son came along. I think I'm doing the math wrong. He's not 15 years younger than my daughter. But anyway, let's say 10, 12 years later, my son, Stephen, his situation is different. Instead of, one long protracted stay, he's had many hospital stays and sees a lot of specialists. So shorter term visits, but I picked up a lot of tricks that have helped navigate all of that. And whenever there has been a hospital admission, even if only for a few days, I now know how to ask for the help that I need. That's something I'm going to talk about at the end as a big learning curve for the person who is in the caregiver role. Okay, let me jump back to Kate. So that 9-month period in the hospital, my husband, he was able to take quite a bit of time off from work right at the beginning. But then he had to go back to work. His company was wonderful. He was an editor at DC Comics at that time, and they knew that he was going through a hard time. But he needed that job. We needed the health insurance, and he would drive out to the hospital after work and bring us dinner and pick up laundry. And so he really kept things moving along. And then he would, have to go back and get up and go to work the next day. And I stayed in the hospital with Kate. In those first few weeks after her diagnosis, of course, we were reeling and just, trying to cope with learning what the disease was, wrapping our heads around the treatment, and then figuring out we had a toddler who had a central line, attached where she would receive chemotherapy and medications. And so when she was feeling good and she had toddler level of energy, I had to be with her at all times, right? So that she didn't pull out that line and her port. And at other times when she was feeling bad, I was with her at all times because she was very, very sick. And also, she couldn't be left alone in the room because she had been used to sleeping in our bed at home. I didn't want everything in her world to change. So I got permission to have her in a hospital bed instead of a crib. But that meant that I could never, ever leave her alone, even to step out of the room to go to the bathroom. So I really, really needed helping hands, and my friends stepped up and they were those helping hands for me. And they helped us get through what was a pretty brutal ordeal. One of the very first things that a friend did, she showed up day one with a little bag of goodies. And one of those goodies was a blank notebook. I said a blank notebook because I'm thinking of this beautiful, cloth bound blank book. Now we all have beautiful notebooks all over the place, but those were definitely my spiral notebook days, my cheap Target thing. So it was a real treat to have this beautiful journal, that I started out using as a journal, but very quickly that became my question and answer book. Things to ask the doctors, because as soon as a doctor walks out of the room, that's when you remember all the questions that you needed to ask. And writing down notes about the things that they told me so that I could communicate that to the next person who came into the room. You would often find that at shift change, there was some little piece of information that would make a big difference in how long we might have to wait for something, or to nudge somebody to check for the labs, so a place for me to keep track of all of that. And I just want to say, no matter what your situation is, even if it's just regular doctor appointments, to have a dedicated medical notebook is a huge help. But certainly if you're in the hospital with a loved one, they're not always necessarily going to be able to remember everything, right? It's really emotional and overwhelming. And also when you're sick, you don't feel well. And so having a place that should be standard practice. If you're going to a hospital or any doctor visit, have a notebook that you always bring along. And then you'll find that it becomes this really valuable archive of information. That's somebody else, a different family member. I can hand it off to my husband and it's valuable for him too, as a reference, a resource. So having a friend bring me a notebook when I didn't even really have it in my head that I needed one became a big help. And that has been a crucial part of my medical mama life ever since. And you can make it extra special by getting a package of like sparkly gel pens or an inexpensive fountain pen like a Pilot Metropolitan, which sell for, well, now about $25. They used to be a little cheaper, but you could pick up something like that in Staples, or just anyway, just make sure, plenty of things to write with. And you can go one step farther. If somebody is having a protracted hospital stay, or they're going to have stuff going on that is going to require a lot of repeat visits, get your friend a nice 3-ring binder, not a big fat one, just like the 1-inch kind, and a 3-hole punch. And maybe put them in a little tote bag. Because every time you leave the hospital, you get a discharge summary that has a lot of information on it. And then you can also print out your lab results and your test results and the radiologist's notes. And putting together a medical binder for the patient is a really valuable resource. And it's the sort of thing that you don't tend to grab when you're running out the door to the emergency room and you don't know that you're going to wind up spending the next 3 weeks in the hospital. So if you are the friend who shows up for a visit with a cup of coffee and a binder and like a little 3-hole punch, I'm going to say, if you can do like an actual 3-hole punch, not just a hole punch where they would punch the 3 holes, like you want to make it so easy, but not a big bulky one. There's like sort of flat, lightweight ones. I want to say a website like Jet Pens, if you can't find Target, Walmart probably have exactly what I'm talking about. Certainly Amazon does, but also Japanese stationery stores sell that kind of thing. Very flat and lightweight and easy to tote around. Okay. So that's medical management ideas for how you can help a person who is suddenly thrust into the position of having to manage a whole lot of information. When I go to my son's appointments, I will add that I always create a 1-sheet summary page. I have a little template, and actually I can share a link to my blank template in the show notes. That's something I have shared on my website over the years. He sees so many specialists that it's just really helpful for me to have. I update it before each new visit. It just is a list of his diagnoses and then what doctors or departments he's seeing and when's the last time he had, that appointment and what was it for? What did they do? Were there labs? The reason that that's helpful is, the doctors, of course, they're looking at his file before they walk into the room. But often it's a doctor who's never seen Stephen before. If, it's a service with rotating doctors. And there's so much information in his history to wade through that I just make an extra copy to give them that they can keep. And they have many doctors have said, oh, this is great. I will scan it into his file. It sort of helps give the big picture of the whole person, not just, because the cardiologist, yes, the notes of what the endocrinologist and the neurosurgeon are keeping track of and are doing with him is in his file, but his file is hundreds of pages long at this point. So a 1-sheet that shows like the most recent stuff, it also helps them understand how many appointments are upcoming. So, okay. So that's a little side tangent into how I keep the medical binder as the big compendium of all the information, but I also, for repeat visits with various specialists and services, I have this summary page that I update. It just makes things easy. So, as a friend, if it's your bestie who is the mama in this situation, you could volunteer to be the one who, once a week get on the phone and say, okay, tell me. And you do the typing, you update the thing and print it out and drop it off. There's lots of ways that you could, work that out. And not everybody's going to want somebody to be like right in the middle of all of the personal health data. But, well, I'll just say that, like, if you were my dear friend and you were here in town with well, actually, even if you weren't, if you were like, I'm having so much trouble trying to juggle it all because he's seeing 10 different doctors and this is going on and that is going on, I could be the person. It's sort of like when we talk about jot it down here on the podcast, with young children learning to write, and you can get the physical piece of the writing handled for them by being their scribe. You can be a scribe for your friend so that they can just like do a data dump on you, and you're going to plug it into the right fields and then shoot them the PDF that they can print out at home. Something like that. Okay. All right. Medical management. Let me move on. But if you have any questions about anything I'm saying, I do encourage you to write. We can certainly give more info if I'm whisking past anything too quickly here. These solo episodes are so funny because if Julie were here, she would be asking great questions and she would have lots of great feedback. But that's all right. I definitely have probably about 80 hours I could monologue on taking care of sick babies. I won't do that, though. I'm going to try and keep this to maybe another 15 minutes, and then we'll wrap her up. Let's talk about food and drinks. Okay, so let's say somebody's in the hospital with a little one. And like me, they can't really leave the room that often, or they can't leave the hospital that often, or there's a lot of waiting periods where they don't, like you're waiting for a doctor to come and give some information. So even though maybe it's a circumstance where you could leave, maybe it's your mom in the hospital and she's like, oh, honey, go get some food. But you really want to be there when the doctor comes in with the results, right? You want to be the scribe writing the information down. So you don't want to leave because the second you do, that doctor's going to walk through the door. Okay. How can we help that friend? Well, protein snacks. So here's another little goodie bag that you could put together. Nuts, unless I would steer away from things where, like, if the patient is in a double room and you don't know if the other patient in the bed might have a peanut allergy or something. So be judicious about, the food that you bring into the room. But some kind of protein is a really good idea. It's really easy to kind of live on carbs and sugar when you're going through it. So some hard-boiled eggs, maybe. There's an idea. A fruit salad. I want to tell you about the best fruit salad I ever ate. It was the day. No, I guess it was the day after my daughter was diagnosed, and it was, really to that point the worst day of my entire life and my husband's, and an exhausting day. And the next day, my sister-in-law had come all the way to town from out of state, and she walked into the room with a fruit salad that she had gotten like at an Oban Pan. And the cantaloupe, I didn't like cantaloupe at that time. That was the best food I ever tasted. Like, I know that I was in shock. I was grieving. I like, my body needed that. So there's a plug for a good fruit salad. Some baby carrots and hummus, or I almost said peanut butter. There we go with the peanuts. You know what else would have been? There were times where this was really useful. My daughter, once she started chemo, and again, we're talking like a 2-year-old, she had to take medication that tasted terrible. And for months, the only way that we could get her to swallow that medicine was It was pills, okay, like we crushed to a powder because she couldn't swallow capsules and the liquid form. I'm talking about prednisone, which, if you know, it just is like one of the worst tasting medications there is. They would bring it in a syringe, the liquid form, and like to, shoot it into like not a needle syringe, a medicine syringe, and that just made her throw up every time because it tasted so bad, and she had nausea from the chemo. So the solution we wound up landing on was mixing the powder into ketchup. And eventually she learned to swallow pills in ketchup from a spoon. So packets of ketchup were invaluable to us. Oh, I get the shudders thinking of it. Like first thing in the morning, squeezing out the ketchup into a spoon so I could get that medicine down her. But it did the trick. And I mean, she didn't like pudding. She didn't like pudding. Pudding would have been easier. Anyway, so I have packets of ketchup on my list because you know what? Like if you're getting French fries from the hospital cafeteria, there's never enough ketchup either. So you can be creative and springboard out from there. Food is usually the easiest thing for people to think of, but those were just some specifics that I know at various times were super useful. Another friend brought me a mug and a box of tea. And this was the key. This little like electric wand that you stick in a mug of water and you plug it in and it heats up the water. Now, there was a kitchen down the hall and out the door and around the corner. I couldn't get to it. I couldn't go there. So to be able to, and tea, like herbal tea doesn't necessarily have to be boiling water. So that worked. So some hospitals, might disallow that, but that's just an idea. And you know what? I've passed that one on to other friends who were in the hospital with little ones. I have and it has never not landed. Everybody always appreciated even just a way to heat up like the coffee that they got when they did get to run downstairs to the cafeteria for a minute and it's gone cold and you could stick that little wand in it and heat it up.
Have you ever heard the expression cells that fire together wire together? This is a neurologist's description of what happens when your kids engage in purposeful practice. To that end, Brave Writer has a brand new product called Practice Pages. You know how sometimes you just want to target one sticky, tricky issue? Maybe your kids mix up common and proper nouns, or maybe they have a hard time differentiating between the three uses of there, and there. Now we've got these short lessons that make use of French-style dictation and reverse dictation tactics to narrow the focus to those specific tricky issues and help your child expand their practice so that those cells can fire and wire together. If you'd like to learn more, go to bravewriter.com/pages or check our show notes.
Let's talk about basic life necessities. So you're in the hospital and you've packed a bag for your child, but you didn't think of all the things that you might need for your own self. I remember at one point being desperate for a hair scrunchie. Just like I had a friend who called and said, I'm going to come out to the hospital this afternoon. Is there anything I can bring you? And I was practically in tears. I said, could you bring me a scrunchie? And she was like, what? Like she's thinking I'm going to ask for, a really good meal. No, I just needed to get my stupid hair out of my face. Your lips get so dry. So some, Vaseline, Aquaphor, Burt's Bees. I don't like chapstick. Like I don't like the waxy kinds. So I was always so grateful for, in fact, over time, I learned that you can always ask the nurses to snag. Usually there's some like Vaseline for cancer patients. And so you can ask for some to keep your lips from drying out so much in those dry spaces. Also, I always needed socks, my feet would get so cold. You might think, to bring an extra blanket or pillow for the patient, but if somebody is sleeping in the room or is going to be spending a lot of time in the waiting area, then ways to keep warm, always appreciated. Or things like Advil. If it was an unexpected visit and now you're in the hospital for a while, you might have your contacts in and no way to take them out. So a contact case and some saline solution and, can you please run to my house and get my glasses? Oh, I remember at one point, I was desperate for like tampons. So menstrual products are one of those things that if you don't expect to be in the hospital for weeks and suddenly, and you can't, I mean, like there was a point where the nurses ran up to maternity and got me some pads, but they were maternity pads. You know, those kind, like, I mean, bed sized. So helping out your girlfriend by making sure that she has all the stuff that she needs. Basically, think of what you would need if you got stuck in the airport for a long time. Maybe you a Kindle charger. Like maybe she brought her Kindle, but now she's been there at the hospital a lot longer than anticipated. So a Kindle charger, a backup battery, and you've checked to see what kind of phone adapter she would need. Sometimes the caregiver is stuck in a waiting room for a really long time. So even though they might have their phone charger, back in the patient's room, being able to have a backup battery, the little kind that could sit with them while they're like in the MRI waiting room on the other side of the hospital. That could be useful. Another thing, and this would work for if the patient is a child as well. Maybe buy your friend if they have an iPhone, you could get a gift subscription to Apple Arcade. I know that used to be about $5 a month. So for $5, like you get, I don't know, 40, 50, 60 games. It's a lot of games. So, that's escapism is really important in that circumstance. Or a book of puzzles, a book of logic problems, crosswords, pencils. While I'm talking about that sort of segues into some kids stuff that works in a hospital bed. You're good. Boy, do I know from experience. Play-Doh actually was a great fit for us in the hospital. And you can get a cookie sheet that is the tray, or like a cafeteria tray is another good option. But the cookie sheet, if the patient is a little one, it can double as a place to play with like alphabet magnets, refrigerator magnets. Magnets, I want to say, just, be careful and ask questions about. Obviously, nothing chokeable, nothing small. And there may be some types of medical equipment that you're not supposed to have magnets around. But that's a question that you could ask. Anyway, the cookie sheet is a great surface for that. But Play-Doh and a package of cookie cutters entertains a toddler for a long time and gives the parent, some place to like focus. There, it's a very tangible thing, and squeezing a lump of Play-Doh in your fist is good therapy. Sometimes, ask me how I know. There's ways that you can help out a friend who is in for a long stay as caregiver by helping them to take breaks. And this is where I think this is really pertinent to homeschoolers, if mama is in the hospital and there's other kids, like what's happening with those other kids, that can be a really distressing situation for the family. So that's where if you are able to invite those kids to your house, come and get them, and just like that's probably, if we're talking about a mother who's got one child in the hospital or maybe their spouse is the one in the hospital and there are other kids helping with childcare and helping with, not just babysitting, but really like some family loving is probably the number one way that you could help. We only had Kate for that 9-month stint in the hospital. But I will say that after she moved to the mostly outpatient part, how I mentioned there was a 2-week hospital stay. Well, that happened to fall right like 3 days after I gave birth to her baby sister. And suddenly Kate had pneumonia and she's back in the pediatric cancer ward. And I it was impossible to be with both of my babies at the same time. I couldn't bring the newborn into the cancer ward and Kate couldn't leave it. Right. So my husband was doing as much as he could do, but he was working. And I called up an army of girlfriends and they took shifts and somebody would come and sit with the baby until she needed to nurse. The nurses let me have a room, like it was an old library room outside peds. And they let me brought a rocking chair down from maternity so that whoever was sitting with the baby was there. And then I could go be with Kate. And then when the baby needed to nurse, we would trade and a friend would sit with Kate. So that was super helpful. But okay, let's say, no, another way, if the patient's a child and can't be left alone in the room, so you could stay with that child in their hospital room while the mom runs over to the Ronald McDonald House to get a shower. I couldn't even leave her room in the morning to use the bathroom until the playroom volunteer showed up. And that was like a choice that I made in order to be able to continue co-sleeping and nursing her. That was a choice that I signed up for, was to not put her in a crib, because it was an either or. I couldn't have both the crib and the bed in the room. Like that wasn't an option. So I only was able to go get a shower. Like my husband, by the time he got there after work, the hours were wrong for me to go to Ronald McDonald, like for the shower signups, as I recall. Anyway, you see my point. Doing laundry is a huge help. A custom list of podcast episodes. I think I just looked at my little notes that I wrote, and this should have gone on the sitting waiting part of the list, but it doesn't matter. This is about taking a break too. You can create a custom playlist of podcast episodes like on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, or you could make a YouTube playlist and share it with your friend. Or maybe you've put one together for the patient. So that's another thing that, like if she has earbuds, your friend could be listening to the really great podcast that you have picked out, especially for her, while she's sitting waiting for that 45-minute MRI to finish. Getting your friend out of the hospital just to take a walk, maybe while the patient is sleeping or while somebody else is there. That was a really big deal for me. It was hard for me at that time to detach because I was a nursing mama, right? And I just felt like, oh, if she needs me and she cries. And so I really was resistant to taking breaks that I very much needed. And one of my brothers-in-law came for a visit. I want to say maybe 10 days in. And he he's an excellent salesman, shall we say. And he persuaded me. He gave me no choice. He said, just come take a walk with me. My sister-in-law sat with Kate. And so, it was fine. It was fine. But boy, did I need that push. We went for a walk outside the hospital and a couple of blocks away. And I couldn't even believe I had stepped foot that far away. That's how glued to the role I was, and really unable to take, good care of myself in allowing myself a break that I needed. But there was an Indian restaurant. There we were standing outside it, and they had a lunch buffet. And he said, why don't we just go in? I had never, at that time, this was in the 90s. Okay. This was 1997. And somehow I had never even had Indian food, which instantly became my favorite cuisine. And that was another meal that I just like, I felt like my cells were singing. So that walk did me a lot of good, being outside, and he was a listening ear. And I want to say that no matter what your role is for your friend, just being, you've probably seen the video that goes around sometimes of, it's a woman talking to her boyfriend about a problem, and he keeps like trying to offer solutions, and she's getting very frustrated with him, and she's got a nail sticking out of her forehead. That's the joke you see when the camera pulls back toward the end of the video. He's trying to pull out that nail, and she just wants to talk about the nail. She needs to talk about the nail. I was on top of what was going on with my daughter's treatment. I, I didn't need advice, and advice can be tricky because nobody has all the information. But I did need to talk about it. Okay, another idea, an audiobook gift card. So I love Libro FM, and they're like Audible, but it's with indie bookstores instead of, Audible is owned by Amazon. So Libro.fm, and you could send your friend some audiobook credits that she could load onto her phone and just listen from anywhere. Something to do with her hands, a coloring book, and like an adult coloring book, right? And a nice set of colored pencils. I'm a big fan of Prismacolor pencils. They're my favorite. But if you do colored pencils, get a sharpener as well. But I was going to say an embroidery kit. Okay, like a self-contained kit, like from Cozy Blue Handmade, that has all of the supplies that you need right there. Not cross stitch. I want to make this point. Cross stitch requires counting and following a pattern. It's too much concentration. So an embroidery kit from someplace like Cozy Blue, where with just a couple of, you could do the whole thing in back stitch, which is just a simple up and down, up and down. And these kits have stitch guides. So somebody who's never embroidered before could like hit the ground running. There's no keeping track necessary. It's just the meditative act of stitching. So I will throw that in as a suggestion. Okay, I've thrown a lot at you, and I don't want this to be too awful long. So let me just wrap up by saying one thing about what if you're the recipient? What if you're the friend who is the caregiver in the hospital with a loved one for long stretches of time? Your friends, or even if it's a sick person at home, okay? Like if your family's going through a thing, your friends really, really, really want to help you. And they're going to tell you that, and they're going to say, what can I do? Is there anything I can do? Most of us, when we're asked that question, we feel a little shy about being specific. It feels like too big an ask to say, I could really use some protein. I could really use somebody to sit with the baby so I can go get a shower. But the people, and I'm sure you've experienced this yourself, you want to help, but you don't know how. You don't want to help in the wrong way. You don't want to bring stuff that just becomes a big pain in the neck to deal with. We had some wonderful friends who sent a beautiful gift basket of like the most exquisite foods from Zabar's, this like high-end deli food store on the Upper West Side. And unfortunately, oh gosh, I hope none of them ever listen to this episode. That beautiful gift basket sat in our apartment for weeks and weeks and weeks. And no, we didn't get to eat any of it. It was not in good shape when we finally were able to like take the time to unwrap it. So your friends want to help, but they may not know exactly what help you need. They may want to send you a giant gift basket when what you really need is a pair of socks. So don't be shy. You are doing them a favor by being specific, by saying, you know what, I could really use like a little battery for my phone. I could use an extra wall charger. I could use a hair scrunchie. I could use some deodorant. I packed a bag for my son, but I didn't think to pack like toiletries for myself because I didn't know I was going to be sleeping here for the next week. I know what big hearts you all have, and I hope that you will let us know ways that people have shown up for you when you could use the help. What works? What do you wish somebody had thought of? What did you not know that you needed until you were desperate for the thing? And what other ideas you have for how to support? And any questions? I think we'll have some good resources in the show notes here. And thank you, as always, for giving us your time and your listening ear. And Julie and I expect to be back next week with a brand new episode. Bye.
You've been listening to the Brave Writer Podcast. I'm Julie Bogart, and Melissa Wiley is my co-host. This podcast is produced by Nova Media with support from team member Jeanette Hall. Thank you for listening and for leaving either a starred or written review on the podcast app of your choice. Anytime you do that, you bring a lot of joy to the team and you support our work. So thanks in advance.